Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, Juliet Bost. Juliet, whose pronouns are they, them, theirs, has been a member of the San Mateo Buddhist Temple since 2016. They were introduced to Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in middle school when their family started attending Sunday services. Since high school, they have been active in the young Jodo Shinshu Buddhist community as a member of their local and district junior YBA chapters, and as a youth minister's assistant. In college, they were a member of the Young Buddhist Editorial and Senior YBA. Juliet recently graduated from UC Davis in March and is currently living in Sacramento area. Please welcome Juliet Bost.
Okay, if I take my mask off? You never be too safe. Please join me in Gasho. From the collected works of Shinran. For the foolish and ignorant who are ever sinking in birth and death, the multitudes turning in transmigration, it is not the attainment of the unexcelled, incomparable fruit of enlightenment that is difficult. The genuine difficulty is realizing true and real Shinjin. Why? Because this realization takes place through the Tathagata's supportive power, because it comes about wholly through the power of great compassion and all-embracing wisdom. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Set a little timer so I don't go too long. Thank you all for joining me for today's service. I'm humbled to be here speaking at the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, and I'd like to thank Reverend Henry Adams, Reverend Elaine Donlin, the broader Sangha in San Mateo and San Francisco for entrusting in me this opportunity to share a Dharma reflection with you all. This is also my first time speaking in person before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm really grateful to not have to worry about being unmuted for a change. Other technical difficulties aside. Although I see a few familiar faces in the crowd, my mom, I'll introduce myself briefly to all the new Sangha friends here. As Leo mentioned, my name is Juliet. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm from San Mateo, although right now I'm living in Davis. I recently graduated from UC Davis with a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science, which is a very interesting subject to have studied in the past 4 years, as I'm sure you can imagine. But if anyone is interested in nerdy elections or politics stuff, come talk to me after service. When I tell people I've graduated, most people's reactions go something like this. Wow, congratulations. What are you doing now? And I'm sure folks here are already thinking that question. What are you doing now? Or even, what are you planning to do in the future? For a while, and even still a little now, my immediate reaction to this question is something short of panicking. While I have a general goal of returning to graduate school after a year or so of work, I also recognize this period of life as ripe with opportunity, yet heavy in its possibility. For better or for worse, political science is one of those flexible degrees offering direct pathways into careers in law, government work or public service, academic research, and the political industry, such as think tanks, but also indirect pathways into just about anything you can spin to your advantage. But when faced with this question, part of me also wants to provide a somewhat snarky answer too. When people say, what are you doing right now? Or what are you doing now? I will say, what do you mean? I'm standing here. I'm talking with you. And while this is a rather sarcastic response and often elicits eye rolls, I do mean it in a sincere way as well. Someone asks, what are you doing? I tell them, well, what do you mean? I'm right here. I'm just being. Now, in May, we celebrate the birth and life of Shinran Shonin, whose life's work at expounding and spreading the Nembutsu teaching formed the foundation of our Jodo Shinshu lineage. Sometimes, usually when I'm neglecting my responsibilities, I reflect on Shinran's life and the moments I imagine to be major transitional or turning points in his journey, as I am at that point in my life. There are many periods of time that I can think had lasting impacts on this journey in the Dharma, such as entering into the priesthood at age 9, leaving the Tendai tradition 20 years later, committing to Honen as his teacher, facing exile, his marriage and the birth of his children, returning to a life pardoned from exile, but forever changed because of it. Out of all these examples, which aren't comprehensive in and of themselves, I often think of Shinran's abandonment of the rigorous, self-powered practice at Mount Hiei, and what it took for him to realize his own inability to be born into the Pure Land of his own merit. This decision and this realization really sticks with me and is, in my view, one of the most admirable things to do, is to recognize and admit limitations and to ask for help from others. That's another microphone. In reflecting on Shinran's life as a whole, the term humility springs to mind quite easily. It's a trait and a value that Jodo Shinshu practice truly seeks to embody through teaching, action, and being. Even symbolically, the wisteria crest, the Kujo Sagari Fujimon, it's on Wagesa and Motoshikisho, I think it's on the podium as well, represents an aspiration for humility in its hanging vines. Bowing to, as a cultural gesture, demonstrates the physical diminishing of oneself in the presence of another. Like you literally lower your head and in some ways lower your mind and a lot of what we consider to be the self that's stored all up in here. But what does humility truly mean, and what does it look like? When I think of humility, I'm reminded of a scene from a TV show that holds a special place in my heart and perhaps other people's hearts, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Here I would like to show a clip. Be careful. Technical's not easy, even in person.
You will not be able to master lightning until you have dealt with the turmoil inside you.
What turmoil?
Zuko, you must let go of your feelings of shame if you want your anger to go away.
But I don't feel any shame at all. I'm as proud as ever.
Prince Zuko, pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame.
For those of you who aren't familiar with the show, I'll just give a brief premise of the series. In this world, there are 4 nations based off of the 4 elements. So there's the Water Tribe, the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, and the Air Nomads. And the show takes place during a 100-year war, which is instigated by the Fire Nation, and can only be ended by the return of the Avatar, who is the master bender of all 4 elements, who will restore balance and harmony among the warring nations. Now, in the episode that the clip is from, the older gentleman Iroh, or Uncle Iroh, as he's known in the show, is trying to teach his nephew, Prince Zuko, a firebender who's exiled, how to bend lightning, which is an advanced form of firebending that requires the utmost emotional, mental, and physical calm and control. Now, over the course of the episode, Zuko tries various forms of meditation and exercise to try and reach the right state of mind to produce lightning. And in this scene, Zuko's frustrations have come to a boiling point after numerous failed attempts. And this is in a turning point in a way for both his firebending training, but also just for his character in general. In being banished from the Fire Nation and sent on a mostly fruitless quest to capture the Avatar, Zuko's whole worldview relies on his feelings of shame and his wounded pride to motivate him in this single-minded focus. In fact, his pride is so strong that he adopts this mission to capture the Avatar and restore his honor as his destiny, or his predetermined purpose in life, in the one life that he's living. But by this point in the series, and I apologize for spoiling the show if people who haven't seen it, he has fallen far from his princely upbringing and is living as a refugee in the Earth Kingdom. Because his name is so recognizable as a Fire Nation name, and the Fire Nation is kind of the bad guys in the show, he has also had to live his life under an assumed identity and kind of lie about who he is for a lot of his time as a refugee. And so this isn't in the clip, but right after Uncle Iroh says that humility is the true antidote to shame, Zuko replies with, "Well, my life has been nothing but humbling recently." Now let's turn back to the quote. Uncle Iroh says, "Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame." Now, there are kind of three main feelings that I want to touch upon and ask all of you to think about what associations come to mind when you think of pride and shame and humility, and what roles do those feelings play in your life. And now I have a story that I would like to share that helps illustrate one of the ways that these three feelings have manifested in my own life. Now, recently I've become a caregiver to this little rambunctious little creature. That's him. So this is Miko, but my housemates at home and we all call him Bubba. Bubba is an indoor cat, and if you go to the next picture, we all call him Bubba because he sleeps in like this little shrimp formation. So we think of Bubba Gump shrimp. Yeah. And so Bubba is definitely an indoor cat, born and raised an indoor cat, but he absolutely loves the outdoors, mostly birds and squirrels. In the next picture. So in fulfilling my role as a good cat parent, I want to provide Bubba with the most enriching environment I can offer, and with my housemates' help, we've decided to bring Bubba a little taste of the outdoors. We strap him in this little harness and take him on walks around the apartment complex. Now, when we go on these walks, Bubba generally is just having the absolute time of his life. He loves to explore all the sights and smells and the little wildlife that live, squirrels, birds, bugs as well sometimes. But the human walker often doesn't share in this delight. There's something so distinctly silly and a little bit embarrassing about walking your cat in small circles around your apartment building. And I often think to myself, I hope no one sees me while I'm doing this. I hope no one sees me walking my cat as we're walking around. And I remember one day in particular when Bubba and I were walking near the apartment, and we saw the maintenance crew coming towards us. And I just put in a service request the other day, so I had a sneaking suspicion that they were coming towards my apartment. And so I was trying to pull Bubba back to the steps. But there's a reason people use the phrase herding cats. It was not very helpful. So in the split second, Bubba saw the people walking towards us and kind of freaked out and made a mad dash in the opposite direction. And so I was a little caught off guard, and I had to make like an awkward lunge to grab him, and his leash got all tangled, and he was squirming in my arms, and I was all keenly aware of the maintenance workers who were standing right about maybe the second row. They were watching as I was and holding Bubba, just like this. It was to say the least a little bit embarrassing. I felt my cheeks get really hot and my face kind of caught in that sort of expression, or that expression that you wear when you're caught in the middle of doing something very, very weird and you know it's weird, and the person who was watching knows it's weird and you know that they know that it's weird. We're standing there going, oh, hello. But I asked where they were headed, and with my arms full of this terrified, wiggling cat, led them up to the apartment, and I ended up kind of dumping the cat on the couch and helping them find their way around. And now, reflecting on this situation, just the idea of walking a cat in general, I often find myself laughing or telling the story with more humor than embarrassment. I think it's the distance from the event that allows me to see the situation for what it really is. And walking a cat is not particularly strange, but even the simple act outside of what we conventionally expect, like you walk dogs, you don't really walk cats that much. That was enough to create friction between my actions and my ego, or my pride. In this way, Uncle Iroh's words ring really true. My sense of a serious, enduring self led to feelings of embarrassment or shame. Only by recognizing my actions as they are, without judgment or preconceived expectations of conventional or unconventional, what's expected, what's not expected, I was able to adopt a humorous or more humble perspective of the situation. With all of this being said, we should be careful in making quick and easy generalizations, that pride is bad and humility is good in every situation. In many ways, pride and humility are two sides of the same coin, both complementing and informing one another. We can consider pride not as necessarily an inflation of ego, but as a very human feeling of self-recognition. While pride can reinforce like a dualistic way of thinking, which is that there is a me separate from the world around me, it can also be a reminder of our limitations in this physical body and human mind. Let me illustrate this concept with a little bit more serious and personal connection. So as a queer person of color, shame, pride, and humility play complex roles in my life. For myself and other queer people like me, much of our lives are spent at the margins of spaces, conversations, and even physical rooms. Feeling ashamed to be who we are and live as we are originates not from a sense of self or sense of pride, but rather someone else telling us what is right and what is wrong, and more explicitly, that we are wrong. But once planted, this seed of shame blossoms into a strong sense of ego, built around living with an internal judgment of what's right and what's wrong. When we live with shame, we cannot see ourselves for who we are, nor can we see the world for what it is. Our perspective is always tainted with a lens of prejudice and assumptions, and our egos are wrapped up in what we are trying to do what we are told is the right thing to do or the right thing to be. When we live in a life clouded with shameful assumptions, feelings of pride can help us regain a sense of self rooted not in who we are, or not in who we should be, but who we really are. Pride can help us recognize the physical bodies we inhabit as substantial, even though they are ever-changing, and the life we live as authentic and meaningful. In this way, pride does not build the ego, but in a way breaks it down a little and helps us move towards a more humble realization of ourselves as we are. In this way, pride plays a very nuanced role in getting rid of shame, rather than being the source of it. While it is not the true antidote to shame, as Uncle Iroh says, it is sometimes necessary to recognize shame instead of as dictating the way of the world. In Jodo Shinshu, we build our Nembutsu teaching off of some key concepts. Two of them are Shunyata and Pratitya Samutpada, which are kind of somewhat academic Sanskrit terms, but really these are teachings of non-self and interdependence. Together, these teachings speak to a fundamental lack of essence to anything in the world. Every moment we experience is a result of a multitude of causes and conditions, both known and unknown to us, that have worked to bring it into fruition. Everything we see as distinct from the world, including ourselves, has come to be in this same manner, such that all has made what we see and who we are is inseparable from the thing or being itself. And for a more concrete example and a thought experiment, just imagine an apple pie. Okay. What makes an apple pie at its truest essence? Is it the apple filling? Is it the pie crust? And what makes these elements of the pie themselves? We have apples grown from trees, harvested by farmers and shipped to us by truck drivers, chopped and baked by yet another person, maybe a baker, maybe a loved one, maybe yourself. The pie crust, which itself is a combination of flour, lard, water, salt, eggs, and other stuff. I actually have never made pie crust by hand before. That itself is an amalgamation of all different things that have come to make it so. And so when you attempt to pinpoint the somethingness or the essence of an object, such as when you try to say that there exists apple pie completely separate from anything else, you find yourself delving further and further back into the food chain, the preparation, and eventually into the world around it. So apple pie cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs the rest of the world in order to be. Now, truthfully, I find thought experiments like the one we just did a little overwhelming once you reach like several degrees of separateness from the object, because then you start thinking, well, okay, so the farmer who harvested the apples needed their parents to be born, and those parents needed their parents to be born, and it gets very confusing and a little overwhelming. But it is in this feeling, feeling overwhelmed that I'm reminded of how limited my day-to-day understanding of these karmic causes and conditions truly is. And I feel somewhat amazed that things happen in such a way that I'm still here, living and being just as I am. I imagine Shinran Shonin encountered a very similar realization and a powerful acknowledgement of his own interdependence with the world. Perhaps it was feelings of shame or recognition of shameful pride that led Shinran to seek out a new path, but it was ultimate humility that he realized and encountered in the teachings of the Buddha that Shinran calls upon us all to realize and entrust in, which is Shinjin. This ultimate humility allows us to see our lives for what they are and to live authentically, bathed in the compassion of Amida Buddha. So here, let us return to Shinran Shonin's words and reflect on them. So please join me in Gassho. From the collected works of Shinran. For the foolish and ignorant who are ever sinking in birth and death, the multitudes turning in transmigration, it is not attainment of the unexcelled, incomparable fruit of enlightenment that is difficult. The genuine difficulty is realizing true and real Shinjin. Why? Because this realization takes place through the Tathagata's supportive power, because it comes about wholly through the power of great compassion and all-embracing wisdom. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet, for your wonderful Dharma reflection.